Imagine being at what's supposed to be the happiest day of someone's life. A beautiful wedding filled with love, joy, and excitement. But what happens when a shocking and unexpected revelation turns everything upside down? This is exactly what happened at one bride's wedding when a black girl, seemingly out of nowhere, made a chilling statement that stunned everyone in the room. With the guests gathered, the bride in her stunning gown, and the vows about to be exchanged, the young girl suddenly blurts out, "Dad locks me in the cellar." The words hung in the air, leaving everyone in complete disbelief. What could she possibly mean by that? Why would a father lock his own child away? The bride, in a split second, knows something's wrong. Without hesitation, she grabs her phone and dials 911, a look of concern and urgency spreading across her face. Was it a misunderstanding, or had something far darker been happening behind the scenes? The tension in the room was unbearable, and no one knew what to do next. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. Was this a cry for help, or was there more to the story? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the shocking events that unfolded at this wedding, and find out what the 911 call revealed. As the 911 dispatcher answered the call, the bride, still holding her phone, turned toward the girl who had spoken those haunting words. Her face was pale, and her wide eyes spoke volumes. The tension was thick, but no one dared to speak. The other guests exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to do next. Was this a mistake? Was this just a strange outburst at an emotional moment? Or was there something far more serious at play? The bride, who had been so excited to marry the love of her life just moments before, now found herself in a completely different situation. She had known the girl for years. They had grown up together, and in fact, the girl's father had always seemed like a kind, loving man. He was someone everyone trusted. So why would she say something so disturbing? The bride tried to calm herself, asking the girl, "What do you mean? What happened? Why would your dad do that?" But the girl wouldn't answer. Her body trembled as she seemed to shrink back from the bride's questions, clearly scared. The room grew quieter as the wedding guests slowly realized something was very wrong. The bride, fighting to keep her composure, explained to the dispatcher, "I think she's in danger. I don't know what's going on, but please, you need to send someone." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. No one knew what was coming next, but everyone could feel that this wedding had taken a terrifying turn. The uncertainty left everyone wondering, was there something dark in the girl's past that no one knew about? As the 911 dispatcher continued asking questions, the bride's voice trembled with worry. She repeated herself, trying to get more clarity from the girl. "What happened? Why did you say that? Is your dad hurting you?" But the girl remained silent, staring at the ground, her fingers gripping her dress tightly. It was clear that something was haunting her, but what? The bride's mind raced, remembering the last time she had seen the girl and her father together. Everything had seemed so normal. They were a family that appeared to have it all: love, support, a safe home. There had never been any indication that anything was wrong. But now, standing in the midst of a wedding meant to celebrate new beginnings, this dark secret was unraveling right in front of her. Across the room, the groom stood frozen, still processing what was happening. He looked to the guests, some of whom were murmuring among themselves, while others stood motionless, unsure how to react. It wasn't just the bride who was concerned. Everyone was caught in this unsettling moment, trying to piece together the girl's cryptic words. In the midst of this chaos, the bride's mind flashed back to a conversation she'd had with the girl's mother months before. The woman had seemed distant, almost exhausted, as she mentioned her husband's growing temper and their struggle with discipline at home. Was this what the girl was trying to escape from? Was her father the same man everyone had once trusted? Meanwhile, outside, the police were on their way, but it felt like an eternity. Every minute that passed only made the silence heavier. The girl's distress was obvious, but she remained too scared to speak, and the bride could only wonder if they were too late to prevent something much darker from unfolding. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The bride's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced between the girl and the door, hoping the police would arrive any moment. But time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Guests whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. Some had started to make their way toward the exit, unsure of what was happening but sensing the danger in the air. The girl, still clutching the hem of her dress, refused to make eye contact with anyone. She had become a ghost, lost in her fear, while the bride tried to make sense of it all. Her mind raced with questions. Was this really an emergency, or had the girl misunderstood something? Was she just seeking attention? No, something told the bride this was far more serious than that. There was a fear in the girl's eyes that couldn't be faked, a terror that only someone in danger could display. Then, just as the room began to buzz with uncomfortable murmurs, the front door slammed open, and 2 officers rushed in. The bride's breath caught in her throat. She immediately stepped forward to meet them, explaining as quickly as she could what had happened. She said her dad locked her in the cellar. "I don't know what to believe, but something's wrong. You have to help her." The officers nodded, but their eyes never left the girl, who had now curled up in a chair, hugging her knees to her chest. "We're going to take care of you," one of the officers said softly, his voice calm but firm. But before anything more could be said, the sound of a car screeching to a halt outside sent a wave of panic through the room. All eyes turned toward the door. Had her father somehow found out? What was coming next? The bride's heart skipped a beat as she wondered if the girl's nightmare was about to get even worse. The screeching tires echoed in the quiet room as the door swung open with a force that rattled the walls. Everyone froze. The officers immediately moved into position, their hands subtly reaching for their holsters, sensing the shift in the air. The bride's heart raced, her instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. The figure standing in the doorway was not the man they had expected, the girl's father. Instead, it was someone far more unexpected, the girl's mother. Her appearance sent a shockwave through the crowd. Dressed in a simple yet elegant dress, she stood there, her eyes wide with panic, as though she had just been running for her life. She looked around, confused, her gaze locking onto the officers. Then the bride, then her daughter. For a split second, no one knew how to react. Had she come to defend her daughter, or was she here to protect something else? The girl's face twisted in anguish the moment she saw her mother, her body trembling. It was clear she was torn between wanting help and fearing the very person who had just entered. The bride took a step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going on? Is she okay? What did you do to her?" The mother's eyes darted toward the officers, then back to her daughter. I didn't know she'd say anything. I didn't want this to happen," she stammered, her voice shaking. She seemed almost frantic, as though she had been caught in something far bigger than she could control. The tension thickened, and just as the bride began to speak, the girl suddenly cried out, "Mom, you're the one who told him to do it. You locked me away. You said it was for my own good." The words hit like a bombshell. The room fell into complete silence, leaving everyone stunned and horrified by the revelation. The bride's mind raced. What did that mean? Had the mother been complicit in whatever horrors the girl had suffered? And what was her connection to the father? As the shockwave of the girl's accusation spread, the officers exchanged a glance, their hands now firmly gripping their radios. The story was unraveling in ways no one could have predicted. The room remained still as the girl's accusation hung in the air, leaving everyone stunned. The bride's heart thudded painfully in her chest, and the officers immediately closed the gap, their eyes narrowing at the mother. "What's going on?" one of them demanded, his voice firm but controlled. The bride, almost shaking, looked between the girl and her mother, desperate for answers. The mother swallowed hard, her eyes full of guilt, shame, and something else, fear. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want any of this." But her father, he was changing. He became someone I couldn't control. And when I tried to stop him, when I tried to protect her, it was too late. The room seemed to close in on the bride. She looked back at the girl, whose eyes were filled with a pain that spoke volumes. The girl had been locked away to protect her from a man who had become a stranger in his own home. The mother, terrified of the situation spiraling out of control, had been forced into making impossible choices, choices that had led them all here. The officer stepped closer to the mother, his voice steady. "We need you to come with us, ma'am. This isn't just about your daughter anymore. We need to get to the truth." Just as the officers began to lead the mother toward the door, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing louder and faster. Everyone turned, tense with anticipation. The door flung open, and standing there, dripping wet and out of breath, was the girl's father. But his face was not the face anyone expected to see. His eyes were wide with terror, and his hands were trembling. He looked at the bride, the girl, and the officers, as if he had just come from a nightmare himself. "I didn't do it. I didn't lock her away. I tried to stop her mother. I tried to protect her. You have to believe me." His voice cracked with desperation. The bride, confused and overwhelmed, stepped back. "What are you talking about?" Then whoa. Before he could answer, another voice interrupted, a calm yet chilling voice from the doorway. "I think I can clear this up." Everyone turned, eyes widening as the figure stepped into the room, someone who had been there all along. The groom, the bride's fan said. He stood there, a cold expression on his face, revealing nothing of the man she thought she knew. With a smirk, he spoke slowly. "You see, I knew all along. The girl's father wasn't the monster, but her mother. She wasn't the one locking her away. It was me. I've been watching this whole thing play out, and now it's time for the truth." The shock that hit the room was unbearable. The bride, struggling to understand, stood frozen, her world shattering in front of her eyes. The man she was about to marry had been hiding a far darker secret. The true villain had been closer than anyone could have imagined. The room fell into a stunned silence as the groom's words sank in. The bride could barely comprehend what he had just said. You are the one," she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. The groom's smirk faded into something colder and more menacing. He didn't try to defend himself or explain. He simply stood there, watching the chaos unfold. The officers immediately moved to restrain him, but he didn't resist. His cold, calculating demeanor sent chills down everyone's spine. The bride stumbled back, her heart pounding as the realization settled in. For months, she had been planning the perfect wedding, trusting the man standing before her. The man she had thought was her partner, the person she would spend her life with. And yet, beneath the surface, he had been orchestrating a twisted game. The girl, the locked cellar, the family's unraveling, all of it had been part of his sickening plan. The officers quickly took the groom into custody, his quiet surrender somehow more terrifying than any struggle could have been. As they led him away, the bride collapsed into a chair, unable to process the betrayal she had just witnessed. She turned to the girl, whose face was streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, reaching out. The girl, finally able to let her guard down, hugged the bride tightly. The truth had come to light, but it had come at a terrible cost. The girl would be safe now, and her mother would be held accountable for her role. As for the bride, she could only reflect on the danger of trusting appearances and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. It was a painful lesson, but one that would stay with her forever.